You know, we can do whatever you want. We gathered people together today that are involved in making sure we have enough electricity to satisfy the demands that are coming with these potential data centers. We're blessed with the notion there's a lot of interest. We're cursed with a lack of power access, and everybody's working in good faith trying to figure out how do you get the power where it's needed, when it's needed. It's a complex process, and I'm trying to do everything I can to make sure everybody's talking to each other, that the questions get answered, and that we do everything we can to expedite the process to fulfill the demand, because these companies, as we've seen with Facebook here and Google in the Dalles, are willing to make enormous investments in our communities, hire people, both through the construction of their facilities and also through the operations that are very, very beneficial to our region. But they're also flexible and can go elsewhere. And so we have to have the infrastructure ready to go, and in this case it's power. We have the land, and make sure that it's available on their timelines. And so you've got the electric co-op here, you've got Pacific Power here, and Bonneville Power, all interconnected one way or another depending upon which one of these potential companies is looking where they're looking at locating.
So is the Bowman Dam proposal an important part of the puzzle?
You know, Bowman Dam is an important part of the process, not necessarily when it comes to the electricity needs of these companies, but it does affect the ability of Prineville to have the water it needs to provide these companies the water for cooling that they need, because they use a lot of water in their cooling process to keep everything in their equipment cooled down. So they have a need for both water and power. The city needs water just to fulfill its commitments within its boundaries, and we have a surplus of water behind Bowman Dam. This is a problem that's been going on since the late 70s, and it needs to get resolved, and I'm fully committed and pretty passionate about trying to get it resolved. And I hope the legislation we've put together in a comprehensive way, reaching out to the various stakeholders, can move soon through the Congress. We've had a hearing on the bill. I hope that the Resources Committee soon will take it up and pass it. And there's no reason they shouldn't. It produces more hydroelectricity. It creates jobs in a county that has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state. It actually can contribute to reducing dissolved gases that adversely affect the red band trout and others, fish, in the new study that was just out. And so it can do a lot of good. And by the way, move a wild and scenic designation from the center to the top of a dam down to actually where the river is. What a concept. The only thing wild and scenic about a dam is when you tumble over the edge of it, I guess, but it was never supposed to be the line to mark where the scenic area started. So we can resolve some of these things that have pended for far too long. We can create jobs, we can provide electricity, and solve water flow issues.
So the issue is the line along the top of the dam, the boundary, the wild and scenic.
Yeah, when the federal government declared that part of the river wild and scenic, it laid the boundary down literally on the center line of the dam, which, as you know, is a road. So you have the yellow stripes, and that's the beginning of the wild and scenic river. I've heard various stories of why that happened, but fundamentally they thought the agencies would figure out where it really belongs, so they just put it there as a starting place. We think it belongs downriver, and I think the agencies agree with that, probably a quarter of a mile downstream or so, out of the face of the front of the dam, and it takes an act of Congress to really move it. And so I think we should do that. By doing that, then, we open up the ability to add hydro power to a dam, and there are very few in our region that can still take excess or additional hydro capacity, and there are companies ready to go build it, and that'd be 50 construction jobs in the next 2 years. That'd be nice. And then you have the hydroelectricity, which is, we're consuming a lot of it around here these days, and demand for more. So the more we can add to the system, the better. So it would also generate revenue then for the local community through the tax base. So you create jobs, you create renewable energy, you produce income to the local communities through taxation, and you know, you solve this wild and scenic boundary designation, and the city gets water to meet its residential needs.
You mentioned about a water quality issue with the gases.
Dissolved gas, yeah.
How would moving the boundary and reducing?
Oh, because one of the ways to reduce the amount of dissolved gases in the water is to change how the water flows out of the dam. And right now it goes off a spillway and drops down and supercharges oxygen and gases into the water as a result. If you put a hydro facility on the dam, you would manage that flow in a regular basis, and you could control how it goes back into the river. And so you would diminish the amount of dissolved gases that are churned up by this water just coming down off the spillway.
What are the prospects for the legislation?
I think they're very good. You know, there are only a few extreme groups that are still complaining a bit about it, and nothing we're doing really, I just don't know where they're coming from. So we've got a good opportunity, and it's a no cost. There's no cost associated with this bill to the taxpayer, so in an era where we're trying to cut deficit spending in Washington, this doesn't add to it. And in fact, probably creates revenue because you're going to create jobs and taxpayers and all of that. It certainly adds to our green portfolio, if you want to count new hydro as green energy. I mean, this just, and puts water in the stream for 20-some miles to down here where the city would take it out through a well. They say the aquifer and the river connected downstream. But for that 20-some miles from the dam to Prineville, where the wells are, it would be guaranteed to be in the river. So you're actually adding water into the river during that stretch.
And what's the timeline for introducing this legislation?
Legislation's introduced. It's had a hearing in the House, and we hope to mark it up in the Resources Committee soon, and then get it to the House floor.
You were talking about electricity and water kind of being both the main, potential sticking points for
Right.
new data centers. Are they equally weighted issues at this point, or do you think one kind of is?
I don't know how to evaluate that. You won't have a data center if you don't have electricity, so that's probably first and foremost. The coolant piece is very important too, but if you don't have power, you're,
It's hard to
yeah. But I know for Facebook, it's a very important issue for them. And, you know, they're looking at this rapid expansion, but they also won't have as much power that they need when they need it. So there will be, you know, so power is really critical.
Was the meeting this morning talking to Facebook and?
Facebook was represented here with Pacific Core and CEC and Bonneville and the county and the city. I think that in our office, and then I invited Senator Wyden and Merkley's staff to be here as well.
Was it about the data center issue? Is that what
It's about the power distribution, yeah. Because you got two substations that are under construction, are being expanded. The question is, what timelines are those on? Getting these transformers, it raises a much bigger issue for me, being on the energy subcommittee. They're coming from overseas. You get in a queue and you wait. And they're very expensive. They're not an off-the-shelf item. And I'm not sure how many manufacturers are in the world for them. And so you really are kind of handcuffed as the rest of the world's economy, you know, in China and elsewhere is growing. You know, they're adding, a new coal-fired plant every week or two in China, and so they're buying transformers, creating substations and all of that. So there's a lot of competition, believe it or not, for these big transformers. And they're expensive. And so what I was trying to push was, is there a way to look out beyond just one company at a time as we plan, and look to, you know, you see this demand kind of coming into this region, or potential for it. What would it take to meet those deadlines? Now you have to balance that against overbuilding, and then they don't come, and you're stuck with the costs the ratepayers are for these facilities. So it is a balance. But clearly you've got 2 or 3 companies very, very seriously looking at this area to locate data centers. And Facebook, we know, wants to expand pretty dramatically. So you could be looking at an increase of 180 megawatts between now and 2022, I believe. It's on that sheet over there, in this region, with all these new centers and the expansion, if everything came to fruition.
You talked about how kind of the timeline is with the legislation on the House side. Assuming that it gets through that process, do you have any feel for how the Senate is likely to treat it at this point?
You know, you'd have to, I'll defer to the people who do that job, our senators, on that. They're here. They've been involved in the discussions and in the community as well. So.
What's the basis for the resistance to the bill by these extreme?
Well, there are some groups that want to take some of the water that's not allocated behind the dam and allocate it for the river system for fish. But there's a disagreement over how much water the fish need. There aren't current studies that indicate that. So then they want to fund a study to figure that out. All of that could still be done. It just doesn't have to be done in this bill. The water will still be there. And there are ways to work through this. And remember, this is an issue that's been out there since the 1970s. I found a copy of the Portland Oregonian newspaper from '77, believe it or not, by accident. And here's a story about a discussion that's going to be had about how to allocate this water. You know, now we're down to a water shortage in the city of Prineville to meet their residential requirements and needs. You've got companies that want to expand, but they need to know down the line that there'll be adequate water for their cooling. In a county that has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state, we need to get this resolved. And it doesn't mean you can't go figure out these other things, but you know, there aren't millions of dollars available to do a study. You need to do that before you can figure out how to allocate the rest of this water. And the water that's back there could still be, you know, that's an issue for another day. But these groups are trying to hang on to this bill to deal with what they want to deal with. Well, that's fine, but these discussions were going around these tables for 2.5, 3 years, and I finally said, enough. You know, let's move forward with what we can move forward on. We can figure out the rest of this at another time. Or 30, 40 years from now, we'll be whoever's replaces all of us, we'll be talking about Bowman Dam. Maybe we can put hydro on it.
It's kind of a perfect storm developing in the world right now. This is kind of a broad question. You have healthcare, you have the national debt, you have economic global unrest,
right.
You know, on the battlefield, the boardroom.
Yeah.
People are a little concerned about the future.
Sure.
And so that's a very broad question. You've read the papers, watched the shows. What would you tell people who are kind of unsettled?
You know, I understand where they're at. I share it. You know, I've got a wife and a son, and he's finishing college, and you say, well, what's his future look like? And like a lot of parents, is he going to get a job, you know, when he gets out? And I have neighbors and friends who face tough economic times. I was a small business owner for 22 years. I know what's happened. We sold that business 4 years ago, but I know what's happened to it since then too. And you know, it's what we face in these rural communities especially. I still have hope though. But this is when you need to lead. This is when you need to fix things that have been lingering for a long time, like Bowman Dam, when you got an opportunity to grow jobs. This is really when you need and can make tough decisions that otherwise get put off and ignored. And cumulatively, I think they slow us down as a country when they're ignored. And so this is an opportunity to really step in and say, wait a minute, isn't it time we did something about forest management for real? So that we did more than just wait for it to burn and then spend $10, $20 million a fire fighting fire in the summer. When we've got people that could go to work in the woods and you know, reduce the fuel loads and bring out trees that could be used for lumber and fill the China market, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I mean, this is actually one of those times when you're in adversity, when people should be able to come together and look to the long-term future of the country and start tackling these problems that have gone on ignored for too long. So the super committee that's been put together is charged with doing that to finally turn the aircraft carrier of deficit spending around. It's not easy, and it takes time, and it's not without controversy. But, you know, at least in our country, nobody's shooting each other to take power, you know. I mean, we work this stuff out. We debate about it, we fight about it, and all that. But we do it in a way that I hope is in the best interest of the future of the country.
Veterans issues.
Yeah.
We have a lot of PTSD issues,
right.
Suicide, TBI, traumatic brain injury.
Yep.
We have a lot of, you know, we call it veterans issues.
Sure.
A lot of people, some people.
HUD VA voucher issues, compensation issues, recruitment compensation, bonus issues.
People on deployment from 6 to 6 tours.
Yep. Yep.
What's your message to the veterans?
thank you. Thank you for serving our community. We won't be free. We aren't free without you, and we appreciate it. And we need to take care of those who have worn our nation's uniform. You know, I got involved in this HUD VA housing voucher for the homeless here in Central Oregon when, you know, the bureaucrats in Portland didn't want to send anybody over the mountains because it was too far and too dangerous in the winter. So they wanted the homeless veterans to go see them in Portland to get these vouchers. It was outrageous. We turned that around. When Chelsea Wells was incented to join the National Guard because they needed specialized services she enrolled in, they agreed to pay her a $20,000 bonus, 10 when she finished her training and 10 more at year 3 of service, and then they reneged on it or tried to. We found out there were 4,000 guardsmen and women around the country facing similar deal, a broken promise from their government. We turned that around. We're rebuilding the hospital in Walla Walla and the one down in White City. The facility there, it's not a hospital per se. And then we're opening clinics to serve them. And several years ago, seeing what was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, the good news is our men and women who do get injured on the battlefield, if they survive and are airlifted out, they have about a 99% chance of survival. What we found as a result of this new medical ability we have and quick evacuation we have is that when they survive, in the context of the IED explosions, they suffer these new traumatic brain injuries. They get bounced around inside the equipment. It has short and long-term implications. So Congress allocated a big chunk of money, I don't remember the exact number, several years ago specifically to look at TBI, traumatic brain injury, research and effort. We have also focused very early on the traumatic stress syndrome issues. A lesson learned all too late out of Vietnam, and probably wars before that, that this is a serious medical condition that has to be taken seriously. And so there are now, as these men and women leave the service, having served a tour of combat, there's a lot more that goes into how they're managed, how they're dealt with, how they're interviewed, how they're released, how they're checked up on later than we've ever done in the history of our country to try and address this issue. Suicide rate is one that is awful and needs continuing work on. The Oregon Partnership has been involved in that, the National Guard is, and we've put some financial resources into it as well. Tragically, it's not just returning servicemen and women who face this problem, but also those who maybe have not served overseas that are affected. And then we're also putting money into research on Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and you say, why is that? With ALS, there is I believe, 50% higher rate of contracting ALS if you were ever in the military, whether or not you served in combat. Nobody knows why that is. Nobody knows why that is. And so we're researching through NIH and through the military research facilities to try and figure that out, because it's a disease with no cure, and it's deadly within a couple of years at the best. So there are a lot of these issues we're trying to tackle. And I'm going to have to go. I've got a 10:15 at the BLM office to deal with this gravel road issue. Yeah. Healthcare, yes, sir.
I just got a note on the Obama administration, I'm trying to remember this, has decided not to ask the Florida judge to review the case.
Yeah. That's where it needs to go on this individual mandate. My own view is that when the Congress believes it has the authority to tell the citizens of America how they have to spend their money and what they have to buy, that's a dangerous line that Congress has crossed. Because you might say, well, okay, that's okay for health care, but what's the next thing that some Congress decides later on that you should have to buy with your own money? It's never been something Congress has done. States have done that. They have the authority under the Constitution to do that. We all have to have insurance for our cars, right? That's a state, an issue left to the states. At the federal level, we've never crossed that line. I don't think we should have crossed that line. I oppose the individual mandate, and I think it violates the Commerce Clause. But I'm not a judge, and so that we've had conflicting rulings now between different appeals courts, and now it's off to hopefully sooner rather than later to the Supreme Court.